So let us begin anew, remembering on both sides that civility is not a sign of weakness, and sincerity is always subject to proof. Let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate. Let both sides explore what problems unite us, instead of belaboring those problems which divide us.
When it comes to the practice of law, let's face it, lawyers get right in the middle of disputes and disagreements, and it can be hard to maintain composure. It can get contentious, and sometimes civility takes a back seat. On top of that is the perception that a win only comes at the expense of someone else, and that means taking no prisoners by using aggression, scorched earth tactics. We see it on TV and in the movies. The bulldog lawyer grilling a hostile witness, objections flying, people yelling you can't handle the truth. But what used to be fiction is starting to seep into reality, and instead of law being an attempt at resolving an issue, it seemingly becomes a sport where the loudest yeller wins. Civility plays a big role in making sure the public doesn't lose trust in the legal system. Even more important, lawyers are setting an example with their actions, and showing that while not always easy, it is possible to disagree with someone with respect, courtesy. Civility is the everyday magic of cooperation, of common ground. Civility is the act of being civilized, and it's just as relevant and important now as it was when JFK talked about it back in 1961. So what's a civilized lawyer to do? Let's find out.
Lawsome, the podcast for law firms. Powered by ConsultWebs.
Welcome back to Lawsome, the only podcast for law firms that loves shopping for school supplies, but hates going to school. We're here to inform, educate, and entertain the legal community on the latest in personal and professional developments. My name's Jake Sanders, and I'm a chocoholic. And with me, as always, is the man who keeps telling everyone Pop-Tarts are named after his grandma, Paul Julius. Paul, man, what's up with grandma? What's going on with that? Is that true?
It's totally true. I keep telling everyone.
I know, and that's why I put it in the describer, just because I want people to know what we talk about and, what's important to us. So, I remember your grandma fondly. I'm just kidding.
I'm going to have to civilly and respectfully reframe this discussion.
I know, and I feel like I've been in civil somehow.
Because my grandma was a Pop-Tart.
Anyway, what's on the show today? This very civil show.
We will not be discussing anyone's grandma.
Yes.
We at the Hot Takes Buffet with an article from law.com and discuss ethics in the legal profession. We talk about civility, fake news, and Venn diagrams with the executive director of the Illinois Supreme Court Commission on Professionalism, Jane Reardon. And as always, we put our guest under the hot lights with 5 questions we ask everyone.
Pull up a plate. It's the Hot Takes Buffet.
The article today is from law.com. It's written by Sherry Clevens and Alana Clare. It's titled, "The Practice is a Profession." I'll start with the opening paragraph. Every attorney understands the value of ethics in the practice of law, even if only for the extent that education in ethics is required to maintain a bar license. However, not all attorneys appreciate the importance of professionalism in addition to ethics. There was Chief Justice Harold Clark of the Georgia Supreme Court once described it this way: ethics is a minimum standard which is required of all lawyers, while professionalism is a higher standard expected of all lawyers. What was your hot take, Paul? Do you have thoughts on this?
It's interesting. The one part I really liked in here that they said was disagree without being disagreeable. I thought that was pretty cool. And I think there's this, we get into it a little bit later when we're talking to Jane, where it seems like these days we're too quick to turn things into a sport, whether it's, an argument or politics or something like that. We label people and we react to what that label is as opposed to listening to what they say. Back in my prior role where I had a little more contact with attorneys and lawyers and and staff, and it could get contentious.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes maybe there was a misunderstanding about what we were talking about, or we weren't effectively communicating or something. People would get a little heated.
Mm-hmm.
And I always told my team, the one thing I learned is listen to what they're saying and not so much how they're saying it. For me, that's what I took out of this, is that there's, this attack mentality. I get it, but it sometimes is counter to being professional and being at least on at that minimum level of ethical.
Right.
You don't have to be raging and make everybody's job difficult if, the whole point of it is to resolve disputes as opposed to, yelling at each other.
Right. Well, and some people think they're getting paid to yell at one another.
It's a good point.
Like Jane brings up, the fact that the billable hour kind of exacerbates this idea of aggression as more hours. It's actually like if I set them off on a discovery, look under every rock, or if I'm arguing against opposing counsel, always interrupting, that the client's getting more. But really what it ends up being is that the lawyer's can bill more. So I thought that was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's like, as far as layers of behavior, there is illegal, which is you shouldn't do it or you go to jail. Unethical means you shouldn't do it or else people question if you're nice. And then there's professionalism, which is just sort of, it seemed like this thing that isn't even related to getting the job done. Once again, I there's this theme that's coming up is it's a transaction. So as long as it's transacted, I don't need to worry about the way I acted because I made it happen, So for me, I think lawyers can get things done without niceness or rudeness. I don't have to be mean or I don't have to be nice. I can just be some flat affect, kind of the robot. But I think that civility, personally, for me, in regards to lawyers, is a marketing tactic because marketing is sort of about packaging perception. And if lawyers could be more thoughtful about what their client needs and how they could deliver it, not about what they're delivering. And it's interesting. You say focus on what they're saying, not how they're saying it. But to really get through, you need to focus on how you're saying things, not just what's said.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's hard to kind of see that there's at the same time both good and bad aspects to the delivery and unnecessary about the delivery. So it's hard. I could see how perception and managing the perception can be difficult for lawyers because they're not sure if they're supposed to be aggressive or if they're supposed to be civil or if it matters.
I think, there's one thing too. And Jane talks about it more later about how, aggression can be successful, but it comes at a cost. And I'm not going to spoil it. She'll go into it much better than I can. But one thing that I've noticed, we learned a little bit about it in our episode with Nika. We've talked about it before about this bulldog lawyer thing, is that aggression used to be a tactic. Now it seems to be more of a requirement, like a standard. Like we don't think that that's just one color on the palette of things that we're using to make this painting. It's become the only marker we're using to write big letters on the wall.
Because it's bold and it's big and it's obvious. You can't even question. This is a person of action. Doesn't matter if it was the right course of action, but at least they did something.
Right.
I think that's a great idea, man. So Jane, this is her job. This is her whole thing, is trying to figure out lawyers in their profession. What does civility mean? How it's not just manners. It's actually beyond that. It's a professional consideration. And it's something that if we learn how to utilize properly, we could change the entire profession and actually have a positive impact on society. So Jane's got a whole bunch of that. She's been in the legal community for years, and she's constantly pushing lawyers to be more civil, inclusive, and tech savvy. So let's go to that fantastic interview right now.
Let's go.
And now, a word from our sponsor.
I met Tanner, who works for Consult Webs, on a plane on the way back from Key West, Florida. And I'd just been thinking that I needed to do some more marketing for my law firm. So when he told me that he worked for Consult Webs, I was super excited. From the beginning till even now, I've been with them for almost 2 years, and the experience has really been great. Having Consult Webs on board is really like having your own team of people that really care about what kind of business you're getting. I mean, practicing law can seem kind of lonely. You always are wondering, how am I going to get clients? How am I going to make payroll? But with Consult Webs, it's not just me worrying about having people come in the door. They're there as well, and they've been so responsive. Since I started with Consult Webs, I have increased the number of employees double at least. And since I started with Consult Webs, the revenue has tripled. So it's really been an incredible experience.
Go to consultwebs.com to learn more.
And now, for a lawsome interview.
Jane Verdon is the executive director of the Illinois Supreme Court Commission on Professionalism. Jane graduated from the University of Notre Dame and the University of Michigan Law School. Her experience includes many successful years of practice as a trial lawyer, committee work on diversity and recruiting issues, and handling attorney discipline cases as counsel to the Illinois Attorney Registration and Disciplinary Commission Review Board. And if all that wasn't enough, she's been generous enough to join us today on Lawsome. Jane, how are you?
I am great. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to talking with you guys today. I love your show.
There's been a lot of discussion around the word civility in the news and on social media. So can you give us a definition of civility as a starting point for the episode?
Sure, happy to do so. The news and social media articles are conflating civility with good manners or decorum, being polite. Now, that's all part of civility, but that's not all it is. The concept is actually much broader. The etymology of the word from the ancient Greek and Latin is relating to citizens. That's where it comes from. So the idea is we need to have good behavior for the good of a community. The Greeks thought civility was both a private virtue and a public necessity, required to keep the city-state together. So the definition of civility is a behavioral code of decency or respect, if you will. That's the hallmark of living as citizens. So when you consider this definition, you can see code of decency or respect is not the same as having good manners or being polite. You can, very cordially say, for example, we don't serve blacks at the lunch counter, or we don't hire women here, but that doesn't live up to being respectful of others in society. And another myth people have about the concept of civility is it's the same as agreeing or not being critical, and that's absolutely not so. We live in a complex society. We shouldn't expect to agree on every policy or law or ordinance to establish order. And if we disagree, we should criticize, right? But the issue is how we express disagreements or criticisms. Do we do it from a place of respect, or are we vilifying the other for holding the stupid viewpoint? The old adage that we can agree without being disagreeable is really one to live up to, and it really seems to be forgotten in today's day and age.
I think you kind of expressed that it's not the same. It's not about manners. And I'm wondering specifically as it relates to lawyers and the practice of law, is there a difference in between legal civility and I guess like civilian civility or political civility?
Yeah, there is. In terms of political, that's referring more broadly to the public affairs of our society, right? And to most commonly the elected representatives who are supposed to be administering the government for the good of the people. So politicians are answerable to the people who elect them. Political discourse, political civility is used to refer to this broad set of interactions. Now, lawyer civility refers to how lawyers behave qua lawyers, if you will, usually in representing clients. but they also have a responsibility to the integrity of the legal system and for access to justice, work for legal reform, etc. Lawyers have to answer for their code of behavior and to law licenses to the Supreme Court of each state. So it's laid out differently. But as you know, many lawyers also hold political offices. So in terms of a Venn diagram, I love Venn diagrams. You have two circles which partly overlap, right? The political and the legal circles. And in the overlapping part, it's pretty broad overlap is lawyers who wear both a legal and a political hat. So in terms of behavioral expectations, there are similarities between the political and legal civility, right? Because it goes beyond just being polite. It allows us to speak with each other, not talk at each other. And that's important for politicians because we need to, engage another's viewpoint, improving civic life, working on society, infrastructure, et cetera. It's important for lawyers because our job is theoretically to resolve disputes and make the justice system work well for people. So there's a difference, but there's also an overlap.
I was reading to kind of follow up on the lawyer side of a little bit more. You wrote an article called "Incivility in Professional Ethics," and there's a line in there about the rule of professional conduct where you quote it and says the lawyer's duty to act with reasonable diligence does not require the use of offensive tactics or preclude the treating of all persons involved in the legal process with courtesy and respect. Which seems a little odd because, on a show, well, it doesn't seem odd, but it seems at odds because on a recent show, we discussed the difference between being assertive and zealous and aggressive. And there's this archetype of the bulldog lawyer.
Mhm.
Where does this come from? And why do lawyers think they need to be aggressive? And why do people even think that's what they want?
Yeah, client
Yeah.
wise.
Client side,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, there's this idea of I need a shark,
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We'll talk about the lawyers first.
Okay.
What you quoted was the comment to the rule
Okay.
of diligence, right?
Mhm.
And in that comment also, and this is where lawyers are hanging their hat on. I need to be a zealous advocate. It also says a lawyer should pursue a matter on behalf of a client despite opposition, obstruction, or personal inconvenience. Take
Mm.
whatever lawful and ethical measures are required to vindicate a client's cause and act with zeal and advocacy, right? So the comment itself seems to be a little bit contradictory. The language that I quoted there, it doesn't say you have to press for every advantage and you shouldn't be offensive, but the same comment says vindicate a client's cause. So there's a conflict there in the comment. But the fact of the matter is, regardless of what's in the rules or the comment, and this is backed up by years of my experience trying cases and in research that we've done on all the attorneys in Illinois, over 92,000, being overly aggressive, being uncivil works too often in the litigation setting. For lawyers who bill by the hour, it really pays them, right, to bury the other side in outrageous, look under every rock discovery request, for example. In terms of arguing or oral advocacy, arguing in front of a judge, if you can undermine your opponent, throw them off balance by a disparaging remark, talk over them, interrupt them, or even bullying the judge often gets results, or lawyers wouldn't do it. And this is where the lawyer culture toward aggressiveness comes from and is continually fed, unfortunately. In terms of clients, many clients are under the misconception that because they hire a lawyer, they have a right to dictate the lawyer, they're a hired gun, right?
Mhm.
And I think this behavior has been depicted on TV ever since Perry Mason went out of vogue, replaced by what, LA Law, Shark, Boston Legal, and all of that.
Right.
Right.
And lawyers aren't really incentivized to correct this misconception in this market, right? If they say to their client, "Oh no, I'm going to softly handle this dispute you have with, somebody. I'm going to comport myself gentlemanly like or ladylike." If the client has been fed an image of what a good lawyer is a bulldog, aggressive, they're going to say, "Forget it. I'm going down the street and I'm going to find 4 or 5 lawyers who will gladly take my money and be a jerk because that's what I want." So it's really a problem. And what clients probably don't realize is this incivility is going to cost them more money in legal fees, make it much longer to resolve a matter, and it also is going to, from the lawyer's perspective in the legal profession, or it really harms the image of the profession. It also adds stress to lawyers' lives, possibly contributing to the extremely high rates of substance abuse, depression, anxiety, blah blah blah, in the legal community, which you know is not the strongest shape mentally right now.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so I think we've got popular culture, and it's being reinforced, frankly, by lawyers primarily in the litigation setting, and judges who don't take the firm reins at lawyers appearing in front of them.
The ethical underpinning of what lawyers should do, have zealous vindication work towards that. It hints towards a little bit of an aggressive tactic, but there's also the thing that it doesn't hint at, that it doesn't mention what it means to comport yourself in that ladylike or gentlemanlike fashion. And I think that's interesting, because how could you turn it to have civility be more of a weapon? Like, if we really want to destroy someone, then let's just use the right weaponry. And so I think there is something about civility being a great classic weapon to use, but you don't think of it as a weapon. You don't think you're arming yourself with civility, but I think maybe some people think that they might need to do that. I'm just thinking about what you said. Incivility will cost clients more money. Is there a stat there? Is there like, you like Venn diagrams? Is there a Venn diagram somewhere about that? Where'd you get that stat about incivility costing clients more money?
We've at the Commission on Professionalism did a survey of all the registered lawyers in Illinois in 2007 and again in 2014. And so it's anecdotal, right? And we asked lawyers about the types of incivility or unprofessional behavior they've been exposed to, the settings at which it occurs, and what they think the consequences are. And 90% plus in both surveys say the consequences of incivility include costing the clients more money. They readily acknowledge that. Yeah.
They still do it though.
Yep.
I mean, like, it's confusing, I guess, from looking at it. I don't know.
Well,
You get into an argument, right? If you're having a disagreement with someone and it gets, you're starting to get heated, and then all of a sudden you're yelling. And I know this is an oversimplification, but once you start yelling, you can't back down. You know what I mean? Now everybody's yelling. So it
you
seems
painted yourself in a corner.
Absolutely. And so it seems like, very well said. So it seems like we're starting off painted in these corners in the first place. And I don't know that that's good. Like you say, it's not good for the lawyers, because it stresses them out. I'm sure you don't want to talk to other people who are just going to yell at you. So it makes it difficult that way. Clients, it costs more money. I'm just like, how do we break the chain here? You know what I mean? Like, where's a way we could step in and say this isn't cool for anybody?
Yeah. I think part of the problem actually is the billable hour, right?
Mhm.
If I have to do motion to compel after motion to compel, bring a motion based on deposition behavior that's inappropriate, and then the judge has to have a hearing, I'm billing somebody for all of that.
Mm.
And so lawyers recognize that they're making money off it, because it stretches out the time that they're spending on things. So if we focused and the clients demanded more results and solutions, I think that might move the needle. And I think it's starting to happen. You can see, and I know you guys have talked with other people on the show about the access to justice gap and how individuals are just turning away from lawyers. Enough, too expensive.
Well, for sure, and it's interesting you say that, and I'm curious. We've definitely talked about flat fees versus billable hours. I'm curious, with all the other major issues and changes that the legal industry is facing, like stuff like that, things more, being more services on demand, opposed to retaining an attorney. And tech innovation is another thing that comes to mind. How does civility affect the broader issues like that are facing lawyers today?
I think incivility is actually a holdover from the days when lawyers set the rules for legal engagement in a way that benefited themselves and not necessarily their clients. By that, I mean this. So, back in the day, pre internet, right, lawyers had a monopoly on information and could exploit that monopoly for their personal benefit. Lawyers' stock in trade was they knew how to access information in books that no one else had access to. And even if they did have access to books, they didn't know how to wade through those cataloging systems, the not necessarily intuitive West keynote system, for example, that only lawyers knew how to decipher. Those days are gone. And then, secondly, because they decided how to bill for their services, lawyers almost exclusively by units of time. So you could decide back in the day, I'm going to research a matter until every permutation is considered, regardless of how long it takes, or get into disputes to benefit themselves. But I think with technology that you bring up now, this is dragging lawyers out of this paradigm that was set, what, in the 18th century, 19th century. Individual clients are saying, gosh, I can get some pretty clear to understand forms and even legal advice online. I don't need to pay lawyers for the same thing. This whole DIY, do it yourself culture, individuals are saying good enough for free is way better than scorched earth for exorbitant fees. I just want a Pinto. I don't want a Cadillac, or what the equivalent is now, Tesla.
Yeah. Right.
And then corporate clients are also in this day of technology flexing their muscles, right? Using insourcing, outsourcing, procurement firms to keep the costs down and scrutinize lawyers' activities to get true value, rather than information and time spent. So what I see in this whole world of incivility, you still have lawyers in the sandbox throwing sand at each other, but as they're throwing sand at each other, they're failing to notice the walls of the sandbox are getting smaller and smaller around them. Would-be clients are going elsewhere. The lawyer's market share of legal business is dropping, and tech companies and others are entering this space, and they're providing what clients want, both individuals and corporate. They want solutions. They want results measured by output and not inputs of time. So I think that civility is going to get righted one way or another, by these external forces that are really putting pressure on the industry right now.
Who they are. I think there's also sort of an underpinning from where they came from. You do a lot of work with inclusivity in the legal field, getting more diverse voices inside of the legal community. What obstacles do you see currently that prevent inclusive practices in law firms, and what role do you think law schools can play in carving out a wider path for more diverse communities to enter into the career of law, and how can that help civility?
Great question. Building off what I said earlier, the billable hour isn't only antithetical to the good of our clients, it's also antithetical to diversity and inclusion in the legal field. Measuring contributions solely by units of time disadvantages anyone who has personal responsibilities at home, for example, taking care of children or aging parents, which still disproportionately falls on women today. I had 3 children before I left the private practice to work for the court system. Objectively speaking, I was more efficient and effective as a lawyer after I had children. I was laser focused, right, on getting the results done so I could get home to my kids. Obviously, this wasn't necessarily appreciated or incentivized by my firm, right? So the billable hour continues to be an obstacle to inclusivity in private firms. Law firms just can't seem to wean themselves away from this pricing model for their services. but other service industries do it. This brings to mind accounting firms, for example. They value bill for their services. Talk about a modern threat to the legal industry. Well, that's probably a subject for another day, but accounting firms are chafing at the bit to get a piece of the legal pie, as you well know, and that's going to be a big, big challenge. In terms of law schools, that's really interesting. They do have a role to play, I think, in carving out a wider path for more diverse individuals to get into the career, and many are doing a pretty good job of it. Unfortunately, the underrepresented minority students still tend to carry greater law school debt when they graduate, and they still tend to attend more of the lower tier schools. As you well know, chances to obtain those high paying jobs on graduation come primarily to those at first tier law schools. So, although over the past decade or two, law grads in terms of sheer numbers contain a nearly 50% women to men ratio and a really good representation of minorities, but they're not evenly distributed. What we have is a few new grads, more majority students coming out of your first tier law schools making the big bucks, and then most, including a disproportionate share of women and minorities, are scrapping to find the lower paying firm, government, not-for-profit jobs. And some of these jobs barely allow the grads to service their debt, let alone save up and get to a place where they can buy a house, support a family, etc. So there are, though, a couple of bright spots on the horizon. There's an organization here in Chicago called Jumpstart that was started over a decade ago by retired Judge Ann Claire Williams of the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. And the Commission on Professionalism partners with all 6 area law schools. And it's a 3-day program offered to minority incoming law students held before the official law school orientation program. And it includes exposing them to basic law school tutorials like how to brief a case, how to write exams, as well as networking tips and opportunities. Well, just this last year, the commission got involved to a greater extent, and I'm really excited for us to play a supportive role, not only for as they enter law school, but throughout law school, and especially as they start their careers. As you probably know, women and minorities flush out of the legal system at year 3. It really starts a decline there. And if we can support this cohort, bring them together where they might be only 1 or 2 in their firm or other organization they're working and feel some support in the profession, we might be able to move the needle on that. So I'm excited about that. I do think the law schools are focused on this, but they're under a lot of pressure right now. DAPP, D-A-P-P, Diversity Attorney Pipeline Program, is another support for law students who are diverse here in Chicago. It was started by attorneys Tiffany Harper and Chastity Boyce. And the idea in this program is to provide training and mentoring to diverse law students and help them find quality summer internship experiences and operate to support them throughout law school, which I think is helpful. Just getting into law school and even just graduating isn't enough, particularly as the market constricts, right? And it becomes more and more difficult to get and keep your place. So I think ongoing support can really help.
It's cool to hear you say that. And it's funny, we've talked to lawyers on the show before, and I've asked them, what if you could go back to yourself in law school, what would you do? We get answers like, I would tell myself to study a little less and network a little more. And I think it's great to have something where you can get involved, like, before you even start law school, let's start making these connections, because that's how we're going to push through this. It needs to be fair for everyone, and I think that, everybody benefits from awesome lawyers, and it's not fair that people just get pushed aside because of, gender or race or something like that.
And on that point, if I could just add,
Sure.
There is such a disparity socioeconomically, and culturally that, some of these folks enter law school really not understanding some of the basics of social interactions that are taken for granted in the more genteel, if you will, law firm settings, and
Mm.
they just need to be exposed to this, and so that those kind of social interactions really make a huge difference.
So, in that vein, what can our listeners do right now to improve civility in the legal community or even just in society in general?
I am so glad you asked that question. I wrote a piece back in the fall on this at the 1 year anniversary of the Trump presidency, and really tried to lay out some practical steps that people can take to move the needle on civility in their community. So I'm going to talk about 4 practical steps anyone can take. And the fifth applies more specifically to lawyers, and I might add one for leaders of organizations. On the interpersonal level, the first step is we need to be self aware. When someone insults you and you immediately have that trigger, you need to understand what are your triggers? Do certain people push your buttons? What are they? Do you find yourself like less able to manage your emotions at certain times of the day? Once you understand better when, where, how you're inclined to behave emotionally, you can be more mindful when you're in the danger zone and better able to respond rationally, calmly, respond to incivility with civility. Step one, be self aware. Step two, reprogram your mind to the positive. So, brain research is really interesting here. We, as I said, have a really quick and emotional response to acts of incivility because they're usually outrageous. They push our buttons. But we also have, as a brain function, similar response to acts of kindness. Both activate nodes in the brain and spread throughout the nerves. So this is what happens when you get that sinking feeling or that feeling of instant elation about good news or whatever. The experts say after you witness or feel you've been the victim of incivility, you should intentionally and purposefully expose your brain to something positive. Read a quote, watch a kitten video, whatever, because you can you can change the brain chemistry and calm your nerves. So that's two. Number three, and this is so huge in this political environment we're in right now, listen, don't label. We really need to challenge ourselves to listen with an open mind to differing and opposite viewpoints. This is so important now because we can set our social media posts, our access to news, to just reinforce our own views, right? So we need to
Mm.
fight the urge to reinforce what we already believe and try to understand others' views. And that's hard because when their views are, abhorrent to you, that the natural instinct is to just turn away. But you can even learn from those viewpoints. So if you can force yourself to listen and then refuse to label someone with an opposing viewpoint, it's really I become quite prevalent and shocking to hear people call other people evil, for example, for expressing a different viewpoint. Nobody is their ideas. Nobody is. So listen, don't label.
Mm.
My fourth tip is really quite weird and simplistic, but connect on a human level by smiling. Smiling. Research shows little kids smile as often as 400 times a day. And how often do you think adults smile? Not
Never.
anywhere near. Yeah, only. Yeah, we're too sour, right? The
Totally.
very serious, 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 serious. But research shows only 30% of adults smile more than 20 times a day. So that's really not so happy. But the act of smiling lifts your mood, decreases stress, and it also can form a positive connection, as you know in your own experience, that may just diffuse name calling and incivility. The fifth tip I have applies especially to lawyers. You asked about lawyers, and I think it's really important that we speak up and reframe. If you hear slurs or statements you consider unfair, we really should say something nicely, civilly, of course. But lawyers are in positions of leadership all across state, local, national organizations, and members of the public really look to lawyers for guidance. This was brought home to me. I don't know if did you see the RBG movie? You've got to see it. So I went to that with my husband, who's a non-lawyer, two friends who are not lawyers, and I was really struck about what a great educational film it is for the general population. At one point in that film, there was a clip from her Senate confirmation hearing, and Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg was as philosophically far from the senator presiding over that Senate confirmation hearing or in Hatch as you could get, right?
Oh yeah.
Diametrically opposed. Yet the
Mhm.
clip shows Orrin Hatch saying to Justice Bader Ginsburg toward the end, I presume, you and I don't agree on pretty much anything, Justice Ginsburg. But that's not what this is about, is it? You are eminently qualified to be a justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. And she was confirmed 96-3 in a matter of hours. And so the point is, lawyers can hold up these examples to the general population and educate them through comments at cocktail parties or family gatherings or barbecues about how different viewpoints can and should be respected in our system. I think it's really an important opportunity, and I think that lawyers really need to step up because just as we said at the beginning, talking about how clients get the notion that zealous advocacy is the same as punching bag aggressiveness, that's because lawyers fail to educate in part and leave it to the media. And I think now the same thing is going on, and lawyers really need to tell the public, what the legal system is and can do for them and how important it is because they don't know, and it certainly isn't being shown in public media. So I want to talk about what lawyers or anyone who has a position of authority in their organization can do, because there's really some fascinating examples here that if people are able to institutionalize certain changes across the organization, it can really make for a more civil and more productive and satisfying work environment. For example, many companies and firms have a mission statement, right, about how customers should be treated. But what about if they also had a statement about how employees should treat one another? We expect employees to treat one another with respect, et cetera. This can set the tone. So a few examples came to mind that I thought were pretty powerful examples here. One is a large healthcare organization developed a policy designed to leverage these viral effects of civility that I talked about earlier that catch on. They put in writing a policy. You're supposed to smile and make eye contact if you're within 10 feet of someone that you pass or see in the organization, and say hello if you're within 5 feet. So when the policy went into effect, the organization really saw civility spread and satisfaction rise, just encouraging that human connection. And then another one. This is an example from Motley Fool. It issued a challenge to its employees 250 employees. In order to get the 20% annual bonus the company normally gave, each employee would need to know the name of every other employee by the year's end. So instead of saying we should all treat one another like family, the focus was strengthening the relationships between individuals. And as a result, Motley Fool received the Glassdoor's #1 culture rating in its class, and it has a turnover rate of less than 2%. It's creating a culture of civility. And in the law firm setting, Brian Cave went through a workshop that asked them to identify rules and norms for which they're willing to hold one another accountable. And the employees came up with 10 of them. They bound them up into a civility code and displayed it in their lobby. And the managing partner reported that the civility code was directly responsible for the firm getting a ranking of #1 among Orange County's best places to work. People want to be in a civil, supportive, fun culture, right? So these are some practical ways that pretty much anyone can change their environment.
That's worth the cost of admission. But my big question here is about reframing, and then about sort of people being taken advantage of because they believe in civility. Because I think that there's been a little bit of people want to be civil to one another, and I think we're thirsting for that. Like, no one wants to argue with trolls on social media constantly about why don't we have health care, and nobody wants to constantly argue about why are there so many guns in this country. And so civilists say, well, hey, if you believe in civility, every voice matters. And so I'm going to tell you that I think kids having guns is probably the best, safest thing. And you're like, okay, wait, what? So, but if I'm supposed to be civil, I can't go to outrage right now, because these people don't care about civility. They just want to say the craziest thing that they can possibly think, jump right into the middle of some confrontation and set everybody on fire.
Right. You can't, as soon as you say the reason it is bad is, you're setting up a dichotomy. What I would say, and lawyers are good at this, ask questions to get at the factual basis. That is a very interesting, pretty progressive and some would say contentious assertion. But tell me, what evidence do you have that would support that policy? Or why do you say that? What's wrong with asking why? Even if you think the other person is saying something completely bonkers, you can sometimes get them to articulate a reason. And as they do it, they realize, I have no factual basis for this whatsoever. Now, it's a continuum, right? Somebody who's going to take the position of arming 4-year-olds is probably not going to respond, and you're not going to win them over by asking for the factual basis. Sometimes you have to disengage. Like, I wrote a piece where, and it got a lot of comments on LinkedIn that just got more. Every time I tried to very calmly respond in a way that was factual based, and I said, no, I was quoting research that showed X, Y, and Z, and this person came back, and after 3 or 4 exchanges, I realized, oh boy, no, I have to walk away. If you have to walk away, you have to walk away. That's way better than getting into a shouting match. The other thing that I really object to is this, you're a liar, you're a liar. You know what? Somebody might lie or think they're telling the truth or dissemble or make misrepresentations, but it's much better to say that statement you made isn't true, or that statement is refuted by the following facts. But once you get into the labels, it really goes downhill quickly. It feeds into that aggressiveness, right? And it just gets more and more animated, and talk about never getting out of the corner. You're just fighting and fighting and fighting. But it's very difficult, because there's that brain response that gets your juices flowing. And yeah, I know.
As a digital marketer and an advertiser, I just know that outrage is a great generator of clicks.
Yep.
And revenue associated with the advertising that's shown on certain websites. So it's tough, but you gave some really, really great tips. That listen, don't label, connect on a human level, reprogramming your mind to think positively, because it can trend to the dystopian or the utopian, or you can ride the line in between. And I think you gave us some really, really good tips. So Jane, we could keep going. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. But how can people learn more about you and your wonderful work?
Oh, thanks so much. I really enjoyed talking with you. you can learn more about me on the Illinois Supreme Court Commission on Professionalism's website, which is www.2civility.org. I write on that blog. I publish on LinkedIn. You can also follow me on Twitter at 2Civility. So I really appreciate the time to talk with you on the show. I'm really privileged, and I really enjoy the work you're doing to educate, inform, and entertain lawyers and others.
We try. We're trying to boost that smile count, but thank you.
Yeah. Why not?
You got to boost the smile count. That's right.
That's it.
Five questions we ask everyone.
Here we go. You ready?
Okay.
Number one. What was the last book you read?
The last book I read was Life and Death in Shanghai, which was really fascinating. I know very little about Chinese history. It tells a story of a woman who was grabbed up by the Red Guards and imprisoned as part of the Cultural Revolution. It was really educational. It was a good book.
Nice. Number two, what is your favorite place?
Especially if you're on vacation, but generally, my favorite place is that place. You've been there between being asleep and being awake.
Yes.
You're just in between, right? You're floating in consciousness.
I was there like 2 hours ago. It was awesome.
Yeah. That's such an awesome answer.
It is. Number three,
Yeah.
What sites, blogs, newsletters, or podcasts do you regularly check in with?
Oh, well, besides your podcast,
Thank you.
actually, I do a lot of blogs in the area of future law, legal evolution, Law 21, the people who are looking to change the profession and move toward bringing us along into the 20th century.
Right. Right. Number four, if you were stranded on a desert island and could pick only one condiment to take with you, what would it be?
Oh, condiment. I'd have to say it'd be unusual, but I think it can be a condiment. Wine.
We've
Second
heard and
answer.
accepted. Yeah, I was going to say
Second answer.
We've heard and accepted that before, so that's perfectly fine.
Okay, good.
Number five, and we've made it to the end here. After a long day or a long week at work, how do you relax and unwind?
Oh, well, since I've already answered wine for the last one, I guess I can't answer it for this one.
You can.
People might think that I have a problem. Out there. So, I'm going to say lately I am really into Homeland.
Nice.
I really unwind. I love that show.
Well, we've made it to the end. Thanks for participating.
Thanks for having me, guys.
For show notes, links, and info, go to thelawsonpodcast.com or follow us on Twitter or Facebook. Be sure to leave us a review and rating in iTunes or wherever you find the you listen to. Until next week, stay lawsome.